was a quiet evening in the city, the streets dimly lit by the soft glow of street lamps. The air carried a faint chill, and a light breeze rustled the leaves on the trees that lined the narrow roads. A black woman, a prosecutor known for her dedication and sharp mind, was driving home after a long day at work. Her day had been filled with back-to-back court hearings, consultations, and reviewing case files. She felt tired but satisfied, knowing she had done her best for the people she served. Her car, a sleek black sedan, moved smoothly along the streets, and she kept her eyes on the road, thinking about dinner and a quiet evening at home. As she turned a corner, she noticed flashing lights behind her. A police officer had pulled up, signaling her to stop. She felt a twinge of apprehension but remained calm. She carefully pulled over to the side of the road and rolled down her window slightly. The officer, a man in his 40s with a stern face and a reputation in the precinct for being quick to anger, approached her car. His movements were sharp and tense, his hand resting near his belt. "Good evening, officer," she said politely, keeping her hands visible on the steering wheel. "May I ask why I was stopped?" The officer didn't respond immediately. He leaned closer, his face showing a mixture of suspicion and impatience. "License and registration," he barked. She reached slowly for her wallet, aware that any sudden movements might be misinterpreted. She handed over her documents and answered his questions calmly. "I was driving home from work," she explained. "I wasn't speeding and I haven't broken any traffic rules." The officer's eyes narrowed. He didn't seem to hear her words, only registering her presence, her skin color, and the fact that she was alone. There was a tension in the air, a silent weight that made her heart beat faster. She noticed his hand twitch slightly near his weapon and her mind raced. She had faced tense situations in court, but this was different. Here she was vulnerable in a way that no courtroom could prepare her for. "Step out of the car," the officer suddenly commanded. His voice was sharp, leaving no room for negotiation. She froze for a moment, trying to assess his mood. She knew that staying calm was crucial. "Officer, I am cooperating fully," she said, her voice steady but firm. "I can provide any information you need from here." The officer didn't move, his face hardening. He seemed to interpret her caution as defiance. "I said step out," he shouted louder this time, his tone laced with anger, fear mixed with determination. She knew she had to act carefully. Slowly, she placed her hands on the wheel and opened the car door just enough to step out, keeping her body visible and non-threatening. "I am stepping out now," she said clearly, ensuring he could hear every word. As soon as she moved, the officer reacted violently. In a moment of reckless aggression, he drew his weapon and fired at the car, shattering the passenger side window. Glass exploded outward, raining down on the street and the vehicle's interior. She ducked instinctively, heart pounding, and felt the heat of the shattered glass on her arms. Her mind screamed, trying to process what had just happened. She had done everything right, followed every instruction, and yet the officer had chosen violence. Neighbors rushed out of their homes, alarmed by the sound of the gunshot. Some grabbed their phones to call for help, while others simply stood frozen, witnessing the sudden chaos. The prosecutor pressed herself against the frame of her car, breathing heavily, trying to stay composed despite the shock. The officer approached cautiously, as if expecting her to retaliate. His eyes darted around, scanning for threats, but there were none. She raised her hand slowly, showing that she was unarmed and posing no danger. "Please stop. I am not a threat," she pleaded. The officer hesitated for a moment, his training and fear clashing with the reality in front of him. He radioed for backup, his voice tight with tension. Meanwhile, she reached for her phone, dialing 911 to report the incident. Her voice was calm and measured, detailing every detail with precision. She explained the situation clearly, noting the officer's aggressive behavior and the fact that she was a prosecutor. Within minutes, other officers arrived, and the scene became chaotic. The neighbors who had gathered provided statements, confirming that the woman had not acted aggressively and that the officer had fired without justification. The prosecutor documented everything meticulously, taking photos of the broken glass, her car, and the surrounding area. As the situation settled, the officer who had fired at her began to realize the gravity of his actions. He looked at her, perhaps recognizing her face, but it was too late to undo what had happened. The damage was done and the tension remained palpable. The prosecutor's mind raced with thoughts of how she would handle this situation legally and professionally. She was hurt, shaken, but determined to ensure justice would be served. Throughout the ordeal, she remained composed, thinking about the steps she needed to take next. Her training as a prosecutor helped her stay focused, even in the face of personal danger. She knew that how she handled this moment could impact not only her safety, but also the accountability of those who abused power. The neighbors continued to watch, some whispering among themselves about the shocking scene they had witnessed. A few offered comfort and support, acknowledging her bravery. She thanked them quietly, her mind still racing with the events that had just unfolded. She knew that this night would not be forgotten, and that it would likely spark conversations about law enforcement, bias, and the treatment of Black women in society. As she sat back in her car, waiting for further instructions from the arriving officers, she felt a mix of emotions. Fear, anger, and frustration were present, but so was a sense of determination. She had survived a dangerous encounter, and now it was time to take the next steps. She began planning how she would gather evidence, speak to witnesses, and ensure that the officers' actions were fully investigated. Her evening, which had started as a routine drive home, had turned into a life-altering experience. She reflected on her career, her role as a prosecutor, and the responsibility she carried not only to uphold the law, but also to fight for justice when the system failed. The shattered glass around her car served as a physical reminder of the danger she had faced, but it also symbolized her resolve to stand up against injustice. Even as sirens wailed in the distance and the city seemed to hold its breath, she remained steadfast. She knew that this was just the beginning of a challenging journey, but she was ready to face it head-on. The incident would leave scars, both visible and invisible, but it would also highlight the courage and strength required to confront systemic issues. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and prepared for the fight ahead, knowing that her actions could make a difference for others who might one day face similar threats. The night stretched on, with police officers securing the area, collecting evidence and taking statements. She cooperated fully, answering every question with clarity and precision. Her professionalism under pressure impressed even some of the officers at the scene, who recognized the calm and deliberate way she handled the chaos. As the first part of her journey through this terrifying experience came to a close, she sat in her damaged car, reflecting on the fragility of life and the power of courage. She understood that the events of that night would not only impact her personally, but could also influence the broader conversation about justice, fairness, and accountability in her community. Despite the fear and shock, she felt a growing sense of resolve, knowing that she would not let fear silence her or prevent her from seeking justice. The moment the prosecutor had survived the terrifying incident, she knew she had to take immediate action. Her car, still surrounded by shards of glass, felt like both a prison and a shield. The flashing police lights reflected off the wet asphalt, making the scene almost surreal. Neighbors who had witnessed the event were talking in hushed tones, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others calling family members to recount the shocking events they had just seen. Her hands were trembling slightly, but she forced herself to take deep breaths and focus on the steps she needed to take next. First, she called her office, speaking directly to her assistant. Her voice was calm, but there was an urgency beneath her words. "I've been involved in a dangerous encounter with an officer," she explained, providing the details clearly. "No one is physically hurt, but the situation is serious. I need documentation and legal support immediately." Her assistant reassured her, telling her that everything would be arranged and that a legal team would be dispatched to assist with the process. While on the phone, she began documenting the scene herself. She took photographs of her damaged car, the shattered glass on the street, and the surrounding area. Every angle mattered, she knew. Evidence had to be undeniable. She also made note of the officer's badge number, the time, and any identifying features that could help in the investigation. As she worked, the other officers on the scene began talking to witnesses. Some neighbors came forward to provide statements, confirming that the prosecutor had followed all instructions and that the officer had acted aggressively without provocation. The prosecutor observed the process quietly, noting discrepancies in the officer's account as he spoke with other law enforcement personnel. She noticed how he avoided direct eye contact with witnesses and how defensive his answers seemed. Once the immediate scene was stabilized, she was escorted to a nearby precinct to provide a formal statement. The ride was tense, every turn of the car making her heart beat faster. She rehearsed what she would say, ensuring clarity and precision. Upon arrival, she was greeted by a lieutenant who had been briefed on the situation. He was courteous but neutral, making it clear that his role was to facilitate the report rather than take sides. Inside the precinct, the prosecutor gave a detailed account of the incident. She explained how she had complied fully with the officer's instructions, how she had remained calm and non-threatening, and how the officer had fired at her car without justification. Her words were measured, professional, yet carried the weight of someone who had lived through a near-death experience. She emphasized the presence of witnesses and the physical evidence, ensuring that her statement would leave no room for misinterpretation. Once the statement was complete, she contacted her legal team again. She knew that the officer's actions could not be ignored, and that accountability was essential not only for her own safety, but also to prevent similar incidents from happening to others. Her team began reviewing police protocols, previous complaints, and any public records related to the officer. They were meticulous, gathering information that could support her case and ensure a thorough investigation. The media, as expected, had already begun reporting on the incident. Footage captured by nearby security cameras and bystanders' smartphones was circulating online. She watched as the video showed the shattered glass, the officer's aggressive stance, and her calm demeanor amidst the chaos. The public reaction was immediate. Outrage, sympathy, and calls for accountability filled social media platforms. She was aware of the attention but focused on maintaining her composure and managing the next steps carefully. Meanwhile, the officer involved was under review by Internal Affairs. He had been placed on temporary leave, and the investigation into his conduct began in earnest. She learned that complaints had previously been filed against him for biased behavior and excessive force, adding a layer of complexity to the case. It was clear that this incident was not isolated, and that systemic issues needed to be addressed. Throughout the evening, she remained in contact with her assistant and legal team, coordinating witness statements, gathering additional video evidence, and ensuring that all documentation was properly filed. She also reached out to trusted colleagues in law enforcement and the judicial system, seeking advice and guidance on navigating the situation effectively. The prosecutor's mind was racing with a mixture of emotions: anger at the reckless use of force, fear for her own safety, and determination to hold the officer accountable. She reflected on her career, the cases she had prosecuted, and the responsibility she carried as a public servant. This experience, though terrifying, reinforced her commitment to justice and fairness. As the night wore on, she finally returned home under police escort. Her car was towed to a secure location for further examination, and she was assured that her safety would remain a priority. Once inside her apartment, she allowed herself a moment to breathe, feeling the adrenaline begin to fade. She reflected on the courage it had taken to remain calm in the face of immediate danger, and on the importance of her next steps. The prosecutor knew that this incident would have lasting effects. It would be discussed in courtrooms, offices, and public forums. It would serve as a stark reminder of the importance of accountability within law enforcement. But more importantly, it would demonstrate the power of courage and professionalism in confronting injustice. She began drafting a detailed account for her own records, documenting her thoughts, actions, and observations to ensure that nothing was lost or overlooked. Even as she wrote, her phone continued to buzz with messages from colleagues, neighbors, and supporters. Words of encouragement poured in, reminding her that she was not alone and that many people recognized the gravity of what had occurred. She responded thoughtfully, acknowledging their support while maintaining focus on the practical steps that needed to be taken next. As dawn approached, the city began to stir. The prosecutor sat quietly, reflecting on the events of the night and mentally preparing for the challenges ahead. She knew that the coming days would require patience, diligence, and unwavering commitment to justice. The incident had shaken her, but it had also strengthened her resolve. She understood that her role now extended beyond personal survival. It was about ensuring accountability, highlighting systemic issues, and advocating for change. She reviewed the evidence collected so far, organizing it meticulously for her legal team. Each photograph, witness statement, and video clip was cataloged and secured. She knew that a clear, organized record would be crucial in any official proceedings. She also began considering public statements, balancing transparency with professionalism. knowing that the wrong words could be misconstrued or politicized. Throughout the morning, she maintained communication with local authorities and her office. Meetings were scheduled to discuss the incident, and strategies were developed to address both the immediate concerns and the broader implications. She was determined to ensure that the investigation would be thorough, impartial, and lead to appropriate consequences for the officer's actions. Even as the stress of the situation lingered, she found moments of quiet reflection. She thought about the trust placed in her by the community, the responsibility of her position, and the importance of standing firm in the face of adversity. She knew that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. By the end of the day, the prosecutor had transformed from a survivor of a dangerous encounter into a leader in pursuit of justice. She had navigated the immediate aftermath with composure and intelligence, setting the stage for a thorough investigation and eventual accountability. The experience had left a mark, both physically on her car and emotionally on her, but it had also highlighted her strength, resilience, and dedication to her principles. As the city continued its daily rhythm, life moved on around her. Yet she remained acutely aware of the significance of the events that had unfolded. Every decision she made, every action she took, would contribute to the pursuit of justice and the fight against bias and abuse of power. She had survived the first storm, but she knew that the journey toward accountability and systemic change was just beginning. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, committed to ensuring that no one else would endure the same ordeal without recourse or justice. The morning after the frightening incident, the prosecutor awoke with a lingering sense of unease, though her determination had not faltered. She had spent the night organizing evidence, speaking to colleagues, and reflecting on the next steps. Today, she would begin the more complex work of ensuring the incident was investigated thoroughly and the officer held accountable. Her mind moved quickly, planning out the day with meticulous care, because she knew that in cases like this, precision and patience were critical. She arrived at her office early, greeted by a small team of trusted aides and legal professionals. The atmosphere was serious, focused, but supportive. Everyone understood the gravity of the situation and the potential implications, not just for her, but for the community as a whole. They began by reviewing the evidence collected the night before: photographs of the broken window, video footage from neighbors' security cameras, and eyewitness accounts. Each piece told a part of the story, and together they painted a picture that contradicted the officer's claims of feeling threatened. The prosecutor then drafted formal complaints and prepared to submit a request for an official investigation. She carefully cited police protocols, previous cases of excessive force, and the need for transparency. Every word mattered. The documents had to be clear, professional, and beyond reproach. She knew that the strength of her case relied not only on the evidence, but also on the meticulous presentation of facts. While the team worked, she reached out to community leaders who had been vocal about police accountability. She explained the situation with honesty and clarity, emphasizing the importance of ensuring that the investigation was handled correctly. These conversations were delicate, as she wanted to foster support without creating unnecessary tension or bias. The community leaders expressed their concern and offered to provide additional witness statements if needed, showing solidarity and respect for her courage. Meanwhile, Internal Affairs began their preliminary inquiry into the officer's conduct. The prosecutor was invited to participate in interviews and discussions to provide clarity on what had happened. During these meetings, she recounted the incident in detail, emphasizing how she had complied with all instructions and posed no threat. She highlighted inconsistencies in the officer's account and underscored the presence of multiple witnesses and video evidence. Her calm, professional demeanor impressed even some of the investigators who had initially been skeptical. At the same time, media attention intensified. Local news outlets had picked up the story, and social media platforms were flooded with video clips, photos, and commentary. While the public reaction was overwhelmingly supportive, she remained cautious. She knew that the narrative could be manipulated if not handled carefully. She drafted statements that were factual, respectful, and firm, ensuring that her perspective would be communicated clearly without inflaming tensions. The officer's side of the story also emerged. He maintained that he had feared for his life and that his actions were justified. Internal Affairs investigators carefully examined his prior record and noted several complaints alleging bias and excessive force. Each complaint was investigated, and patterns began to emerge that painted a concerning picture. The prosecutor's legal team reviewed these findings, noting how previous incidents could demonstrate a pattern of misconduct. They documented everything meticulously, preparing for any potential disciplinary proceedings or legal action. The prosecutor also focused on her own emotional well-being. She knew that incidents like this could leave lingering trauma, so she took time to speak with a trusted counselor. They discussed strategies for managing stress, maintaining focus, and continuing to work effectively while coping with the psychological impact of the encounter. She found that acknowledging her emotions and seeking guidance strengthened her ability to navigate the challenges ahead. As the investigation unfolded, she began coordinating with other legal experts and civil rights advocates. Together, they reviewed policies regarding the use of force, racial profiling, and accountability within law enforcement. She contributed her knowledge of the legal system, emphasizing how proper procedures and transparent investigations were essential for public trust. These discussions were intense, sometimes frustrating, but they fueled her determination to see justice done. Witnesses who had been present during the incident were contacted again to provide statements under formal documentation. Each person recalled the officer's aggressive behavior, the sound of the gunshot, and the calm, non-threatening way the prosecutor had responded. These statements became critical evidence, strengthening the case and creating a clear narrative of the events. The prosecutor also prepared for possible challenges. She anticipated that the officer's defense might attempt to discredit her, question her motives, or cast doubt on the evidence. To counter this, she ensured that every document, statement, and photograph was organized, time-stamped, and verified. Her team rehearsed responses, strategized on how to present the evidence in the most compelling way, and considered potential legal arguments that could arise. Community engagement remained a priority. She spoke with local organizations about the importance of accountability and transparency in law enforcement. These meetings were not about publicity. They were about education and advocacy. She shared her experience to highlight systemic issues, emphasizing that the goal was to improve the system, not to create conflict. Throughout the day, she reflected on the broader implications of the incident. This was not just about one officer's actions. It was about a system that could fail when biases went unchecked. She thought about others who might have faced similar dangers without the protection of her position or legal knowledge. This reflection fueled her commitment to ensuring that her experience would lead to meaningful change. By evening, the office had compiled a comprehensive report, ready for submission to internal affairs and other relevant oversight bodies. Every detail had been considered, every angle covered, and every piece of evidence carefully documented. The prosecutor reviewed the final report personally, checking for accuracy, clarity, and thoroughness. She knew that this was the foundation for accountability, and that a mistake or omission could weaken the case. The prosecutor's phone continued to receive messages of support from colleagues, community members, and even strangers who had watched the news coverage. Each message was a reminder of the importance of her actions and the impact her courage could have on others. She responded thoughtfully, acknowledging the support while staying focused on the work that lay ahead. As the night drew on, she took a moment to step outside her office and look at the city lights. The streets were busy with the normal rhythm of life, yet the memory of the previous night lingered. She thought about the officer, the witnesses, and the community, realizing that the events had created ripples far beyond the immediate incident. She felt a deep sense of responsibility, knowing that the choices she made in the coming days would affect many people. Returning to her desk, she began planning the next phase of the process. She scheduled meetings with internal affairs, legal consultants, and community leaders. She drafted talking points for potential press briefings and considered how best to advocate for reforms in law enforcement policies. Every action was deliberate, every word carefully chosen, reflecting her professionalism and dedication. In the quiet hours of the night, she also allowed herself brief moments of reflection and self-compassion. She acknowledged the fear and anger she had felt, recognizing that these emotions were natural responses to a threatening situation. By confronting her feelings honestly, she strengthened her resilience and her ability to continue pursuing justice. By the end of Part 3 of her journey, the prosecutor had transformed the initial trauma into purposeful action, She had navigated the complexities of the investigation, engaged with her community, managed media attention, and prepared for potential legal challenges. She had demonstrated courage, intelligence, and determination, setting the stage for the next steps in seeking accountability and systemic change. She knew that the road ahead would be long and challenging, but she was ready to continue, guided by her commitment to justice and the belief that no one should be subjected to violence or bias without recourse. The days following the incident were tense and filled with anticipation. The prosecutor had spent countless hours reviewing evidence, meeting with witnesses, and preparing for the formal proceedings that would confront the officer responsible. Each moment brought a mix of anxiety and determination. She understood that this confrontation would be pivotal, not only for her safety but also for justice and accountability within the community. The meeting was scheduled in a neutral conference room at the Internal Affairs Division. The atmosphere was formal, yet charged with an undercurrent of tension. The prosecutor arrived early, reviewing her notes one last time. Her documents were organized meticulously, from eyewitness accounts to video footage and photographs of the damaged vehicle. She knew that presenting her case clearly and calmly was crucial. She also understood that the officer, defensive and unprepared, would attempt to minimize his responsibility, making her preparation even more important. When the officer entered the room, he seemed surprised to see her. He had treated her during the incident as just another black woman on the street, someone he could intimidate and control. Now confronted with her presence in a professional setting, his confidence faltered. She maintained a composed demeanor, showing no fear, only a resolute calm that made his discomfort more visible. The contrast was striking, and it was a reminder of how often biases and assumptions cloud judgment. The session began with introductions from the Internal Affairs investigators. They outlined the purpose of the meeting: to hear first-hand accounts, clarify discrepancies, and gather evidence for an official report. The prosecutor spoke first, recounting the incident with clarity and precision. She described her actions, her compliance, and the sudden aggression displayed by the officer. She emphasized the presence of multiple witnesses and the corroborating video evidence. Carefully laying out the timeline of events as she spoke, the officer attempted to interject, claiming he had feared for his life. He described how he believed there had been a threat, and how his training had dictated a quick response. The prosecutor listened carefully, acknowledging his statements without responding immediately. When her turn to respond came, she addressed each claim logically, pointing out inconsistencies and explaining how the evidence contradicted his version of events. She remained calm, measured, and professional, which highlighted the stark contrast between her composure and his defensive posture. Witnesses were called in to provide their accounts. Each one confirmed that she had followed the officer's instructions, had not made any sudden or threatening movements, and had remained composed throughout the encounter. Their testimonies reinforced her narrative, adding credibility and weight to her account. Video footage from nearby security cameras and bystanders' phones was reviewed, showing the exact moment the officer fired at her car without justification. The visual evidence was undeniable, making the officer's defense increasingly difficult. The officer's previous record was also discussed. Internal Affairs investigators presented documentation of prior complaints regarding bias and excessive force. These incidents were examined in detail, revealing a troubling pattern. The prosecutor highlighted how these past behaviors aligned with his actions during her encounter, reinforcing the need for accountability. She remained professional, focusing on the facts rather than personal attacks, which strengthened her credibility and the weight of her argument. Throughout the meeting, the prosecutor's calm and authoritative presence made a strong impression on everyone in the room. Her ability to articulate the situation clearly and provide detailed evidence left little room for doubt. The officer, increasingly defensive and frustrated, struggled to respond effectively. The contrast between their composure and approach underscored the gravity of his actions and the importance of accountability. As the discussion continued, the investigators explored the broader implications of the incident. They asked the prosecutor to provide recommendations on policy changes, training improvements, and measures to prevent similar incidents in the future. She suggested enhanced training on bias awareness, proper use of force, and communication with civilians. She also emphasized the importance of transparency and community engagement to rebuild Trust and prevent future harm. The officer attempted to justify his actions by citing stress and split-second decision-making, but the prosecutor countered by pointing out the standards and expectations for law enforcement professionals. She emphasized that fear and personal bias cannot justify reckless behavior, especially when it endangers the lives of civilians. Her points were supported by the evidence, the witness statements, and the documented history of the officer's conduct. During a brief recess, the prosecutor reviewed her notes and reflected on the progress made. She recognized that the confrontation was not just about her personal experience, but about highlighting systemic issues and ensuring that accountability was enforced. She felt a deep sense of responsibility to advocate for justice, knowing that her actions could influence policies and potentially protect others from similar incidents. When the session resumed, the investigators asked the officer to respond to specific discrepancies in his account. He became increasingly defensive, his explanations inconsistent and his tone less authoritative. The prosecutor observed carefully, documenting each statement and noting the contradictions. She remained composed, responding only when necessary to clarify facts or correct inaccuracies. As the meeting drew to a close, the investigators summarized the findings and outlined the next steps. The officer would face disciplinary actions, and the evidence would be forwarded for further review and potential legal proceedings. The prosecutor had successfully presented her case, maintained her professionalism, and ensured that her voice was heard. She had navigated a highly stressful and confrontational situation with intelligence, courage, and unwavering focus. Leaving the meeting, the prosecutor felt a mixture of relief and resolve. She had faced the officer directly, challenged his behavior, and laid the groundwork for accountability. Her courage and preparation had made a difference not only for herself but for the broader community. She knew that the journey was far from over, but this confrontation had been a critical step toward justice. In the days that followed, she continued to work with internal affairs, legal consultants, and community leaders to monitor the progress of the investigation. She remained engaged, ensuring that the case was handled fairly and transparently. Media attention continued, but she managed communications carefully, providing factual updates and avoiding sensationalism. The incident also sparked broader discussions within the police department and community organizations. Training sessions on bias, communication, and use of force were implemented, and policies were reviewed to prevent similar occurrences. The prosecutor's experience became a case study for reform and accountability, demonstrating the impact of courage, professionalism, and persistence. As she reflected on the confrontation, the prosecutor recognized the personal growth it had fostered. She had faced fear, stress, and aggression with composure and strength. She had used her knowledge, experience, and resources to advocate for justice, setting an example for others. The lessons learned from this encounter extended beyond her personal story, contributing to meaningful change and a renewed commitment to fairness and accountability. Even as life returned to a semblance of normalcy, the prosecutor remained vigilant. She continued to document developments, support witnesses, and ensure that the investigation proceeded without bias or delay. Her actions reinforced the principle that no one is above the law, and that courage and professionalism can drive accountability and reform. By the end of Part 4, the confrontation had achieved its immediate purpose. The officer was being held accountable, systemic issues were being addressed, and the prosecutor had demonstrated the power of composed, deliberate action in the face of aggression and bias. The story was far from over, but the foundation for justice and change had been firmly established. She felt a deep sense of responsibility, knowing that the work ahead required continued dedication, vigilance, and unwavering commitment to justice. The weeks following the confrontation were intense but productive. The prosecutor continued her work with internal affairs, legal experts, and community leaders to ensure that the investigation remained thorough and transparent. She knew that accountability required patience and diligence, and she approached each day with focus and determination. The experience had been life-changing, but she refused to let fear or frustration derail her mission. She had survived a violent act and turned it into a force for justice and reform. The officer was placed on administrative leave while the investigation proceeded. His actions were under scrutiny, and the weight of public attention pressed on him. Complaints from previous incidents had resurfaced, and internal affairs meticulously reviewed each case. The prosecutor stayed involved, providing clarifications, answering questions, and ensuring that all facts were considered accurately. She wanted to make sure that the process was fair, but also unyielding in its pursuit of accountability. Community support remained strong. Local organizations, neighbors, and colleagues expressed solidarity, recognizing the importance of her courage. Some attended meetings with officials to provide testimony, while others offered assistance in documenting policy recommendations. These actions reinforced the message that justice was a communal effort, and that individuals could make a difference when they stood together. Meanwhile, the prosecutor continued to balance her professional responsibilities with the demands of the ongoing investigation. She remained active in her role, attending court sessions, preparing cases, and mentoring junior colleagues. Despite the personal stress, she maintained her dedication to the law and to the people she served. Her resilience was evident, and her team admired her ability to stay composed and focused. The officer's disciplinary hearing began, a formal process that examined his actions and prior record. The prosecutor attended as a key witness, providing testimony that clearly outlined the sequence of events. Video evidence, eyewitness accounts, and her detailed documentation formed the backbone of her case. Her words were calm, firm, and factual, leaving little room for doubt about the officer's misconduct. The hearing panel asked questions, explored inconsistencies, and reviewed the evidence carefully, ultimately concluding that the officer had violated multiple policies and standards. The findings were significant. The officer faced suspension, mandatory retraining, and potential legal consequences. The decision sent a strong message about accountability and the importance of ethical conduct in law enforcement. The prosecutor's role in ensuring this outcome highlighted her courage, professionalism, and commitment to justice. It was a moment of validation, showing that persistence and preparation could lead to meaningful consequences. In the days following the hearing, the prosecutor worked with community leaders and legal experts to propose reforms aimed at preventing similar incidents. She advocated for enhanced training programs on bias awareness, communication, and appropriate use of force. Policies regarding transparency, reporting, and accountability were reviewed and strengthened. Her efforts reflected a vision of a safer, fairer community where public trust in law enforcement could be rebuilt. Media coverage of the outcome was widespread. The story of the incident, the confrontation, and the resulting reforms inspired public conversations about justice and accountability. The prosecutor managed her public communications carefully, providing clear and factual updates without sensationalism. Her goal was to educate and inform, not to inflame tensions. The response from the community was overwhelmingly positive, with many expressing admiration for her bravery and commitment. On a personal level, the prosecutor took time to reflect on the journey. The incident had tested her resilience, composure, and professional abilities. She acknowledged the fear, frustration, and anger she had experienced, but she also recognized the growth and strength that emerged from facing the challenge head-on. She had learned the importance of preparation, documentation, and calm advocacy in the pursuit of justice. She also reached out to support networks, including colleagues, friends, and mental health professionals, to process the emotional impact of the events. These conversations provided perspective, encouragement, and practical strategies for coping with stress. By addressing her own well-being, she reinforced her ability to continue advocating for justice and supporting others who might face similar challenges. The prosecutor's actions began to influence broader discussions about law enforcement policies and community relations. Workshops, seminars, and community forums were organized to explore ways to improve training, accountability, and transparency. Her story became a case study for ethical advocacy, demonstrating how courage, preparation, and professionalism could drive systemic change. She also engaged with younger legal professionals and students, sharing her experiences as lessons in resilience, ethical conduct, and civic responsibility. Her guidance emphasized the importance of standing up for justice, documenting facts carefully, and maintaining composure in high-stress situations. Her story inspired a new generation to recognize the power of integrity and advocacy. Over time, the incident that had initially been traumatic became a catalyst for positive change. The officer's actions were addressed, policies were revised, and the community became more engaged in discussions about accountability and fairness. The prosecutor's courage and professionalism left a lasting impact, reinforcing the principle that one person's actions can influence broader systems and create meaningful reform. As life gradually returned to a sense of normalcy, the prosecutor continued her work with renewed purpose. She remained vigilant in monitoring the implementation of reforms and continued to support community initiatives aimed at improving trust and safety. Her experience had shaped her perspective, making her more empathetic, strategic, and determined. The city itself felt the ripple effects of the incident. Conversations about accountability and bias became more widespread, and the public demand for transparency in law enforcement increased. The prosecutor's role in these developments was recognized by peers, community members, and legal professionals alike. She had not only survived a dangerous encounter, but had also transformed it into an opportunity for justice and systemic improvement. Reflecting on the journey, the prosecutor felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She had faced a life-threatening situation, navigated complex legal and social dynamics, and contributed to meaningful change. Her story was one of resilience, courage, and unwavering commitment to justice. It demonstrated that even in the face of fear and aggression, principled action could lead to accountability and reform. By the end of this chapter in her life, the prosecutor had achieved both personal and professional milestones. The officer had been held accountable, policies had been revised, and community awareness had increased. Her courage, preparation, and professionalism had created lasting impact, illustrating the power of one determined individual to influence systemic change and promote justice for all. She continued her work with renewed dedication, ready to face future challenges with the same integrity, focus, and courage that had guided her through this defining experience.